Continuing where we were last time, where was that? We were mentioning that power demands order, which is a part of what could be referred to, I guess, as the full sequential title would actually be growth requires direction, direction requires stability, stability requires power, and power demands order. And if you recall specifically, we were using an example of how it is apparently, or how it is in this external world, that, for instance, in matters political, if we had a coup, once it is executed, once it is completed, the disorderly rebels themselves, as soon as they get in any seat of authority, demand and impose order. Now, that's sort of where we left off. So let's push on into the sequence. And let me put it to you as a question. But it's the kind of question, again, that does not exist. The question rhetorically will fly. But if you will note, neither you nor anyone else, not because of intelligence, but you would have never asked the question. And as soon as I do it, I think some of you will be able to check with your own nervous system and see that at first it may strike you and then it wants to fly, because it has no operational basis in the three-dimensional world. There's no reason to think in this manner. So listen, it's very simple, but it's subtle, as I said, because it is non-functional. It is unnecessary. But now, let's consider, use a good hardwired example out here in life, that we have a political coup has taken place. And let's say that it ends up one guy. He's thrown over the previous government, the previous dictator, and now he is the head dictator. And the very next day, the first thing he does is issue orders, hey, the revolution's over, folks. I'm here, calm down. The revolution's here, and just like we said, we're your friends. Anyone on the street after 5 will be shot. Have a nice day. And he might say, and I mean it, have a nice day and get off the street and calm down. Now, none of that is exceptional whatsoever. That is the nature of the ups and downs of how life grows and how life moves in the visible part of man's spectrum. But listen to the question. Ask yourself this. Now remember, we're dealing, make it nice and simple, a little island somewhere. And the coup has taken place, and we've got this one guy. He is the absolute, maybe he's tried to come up with a new term, but he is the absolute beginning and end, all-powerful father figure, perhaps God on earth, Haile Selassie's right-hand foot, in charge. And parenthetically it says, and smile when you say that. So the man has got all of the control. He is the dominant one, and the whole island is dancing backwards to him right now. Now you follow. So we're talking about, remember we start, power demands order. So we're talking about a single person. We'll get around to perhaps your own brain in a second, according to which proves to be of greater importance. Here is the figure of complete, total power. Now here's the question. Why is it that it never happens that we have a figure under certain conditions with absolute, total power, and it never happens that this figure, this all-powerful source, tells the people, rather than it becoming an immediately authoritarian regime and that everyone must absolutely toe the line? If the man has absolute power, why does it never happen that he directs the people, everybody kind of loosen up, be kind of casual, in fact, be a little disorderly? Does anyone see the subtleness of the question? Not because the question itself is a supreme insight, but because the question itself almost, although rhetorical it's all right, the sentence could be diagrammed, the question is almost three-dimensionally impertinent. Because everything immediately tells you, if you listen to your own nervous system speaking in any kind of psychological or sociological or political babble, yammering, it's just immediately going to say, well, that's not the way things work. You do not get a dictator. A man does not get in power. There's no such thing as an enlightened dictator. Your nervous system might say to my question, and it might suggest that that's what you're talking about. You're saying that a guy goes to all the trouble to grab all the power, and then it turns out to be Santa Claus. Nobody's going to do that. Why? Now, of course, you got to get past the three-dimensional level of obvious sociological or psychological or political responses that your nervous system might have. Think about the energy and life itself behind all of this, as much as you can make out, just what seems to be right before your eyes if you look past the surface. If you've got a figure that's got all power, even if you're an ordinary nervous system, I don't have to say anything after that, because all power you immediately picture. Every Hollywood movie, every novel, every piece of mythology, things from Vedi Meekums, anytime the nervous system of man, the history in the nervous system of man, anytime you've got one figure that takes complete power, you don't have to say, well, how did it turn out? Or what kind of state did he set up? You would show yourself as probably a dropout at kindergarten. Everybody knows if a guy gets into, not voted in, of course, you don't get voted in head tyrant. But one guy ends up with all the power, you don't have to say, well, how are the conditions? I mean, how did things work out? You think, good God. No, you fell off of not only a turnip truck, you fell off of a turnip truck probably pre-war vintage. You don't ask, but now I'm asking you. Why is it not possible? Because, listen, it makes more sense than your original nervous system response may have been, in spite of all the historical, which is complete, proof and phenomenon that says that's the way things are. If you think about it, and we're talking about a man with complete power, what would stop him? Even if you take a quick glance just at the three-dimensional world, what would stop somebody with complete power from operating it on that basis? If he's got complete power to begin with, why does it have to be on the basis that the more powerful the person is, the more order they impose, which is an operational definition of authoritarian governments in situations? Because that is what your old nervous system would be responding to, would be the reality of that the more power, apparently, still apparently, we're talking about stuff out there, that the more power somebody has, the more order they impose. That's just the way it is. But if you just stop there and say, well, that's the way it is. Okay, just stop there. But see, that is always the three-dimensional world. If you can see past that, if you can see a more complex version of it, even the smaller parts are not wrong. They're just perfect. But the more power a person has, the more order they impose. I'm not repeating this because I've lost my place since I don't have one. I'm repeating it, trying to get you to, it is so subtle. That is, it's so obvious to start with. You go, yeah, I know that. You don't know that. It's just when I put it that way, just some of you got some passing knowledge of current events, if not history, you go, yeah, that's the way it is. That if, instead of me just saying the more power that someone has, if we say a real dictator, a real authoritarian pain in the thing, if he gets in, he's going to impose more order. Because the more power somebody has, the more order they demand. That if you get into a place vis-a-vis, if you're missing any of this, if you are in a external state wherein they elect officials, people voting themselves power, they have the least amount of ability to impose order. But don't look at just political the kinds of political fodder that your old nervous system might come up with and say, well, yeah, because most democracies end up and they have divisions of power, and one person, even though executive branch, the prime minister or a president, cannot impose his will upon the legislative or the parliamentary. You got to get past that. It is devilishly subtle. The more power one person has, the more order he will impose. Now back to the question. Why? If he's got all that power to start with, he's got the supreme power. He's the one person on this island in that situation that could go, hey, I had a hard time up there in the mountains and fighting this revolution and throwing over that old government, and Jesus. We all had a hard time. And here it is, as soon as I got in power, I started issuing all these orders and shooting people. And I suddenly realized, now I got all the power. Hey, ease up, folks. I'll ease up. Well, he wouldn't necessarily have to say that. But he'd tell them, ease up. He could direct them. Ease up, damn it. Loosen up. If he's got all the power, why not? But notice, it never, ever, not only never happens, nobody even thinks about it. That although it makes sense, the sentence, nobody would ever ask themselves, why is it that the more power someone has, the more order they impose? In fact, why would it not be that at least sometimes the more power somebody had, the more they could ease up? Why? Well, I can't stay here forever. I will assume that a few of you caught a glimpse of it, or perhaps like a virus, maybe it'll come back to haunt you later on. See, because the first part of me stating the obvious, me stating the historical obvious, whether it's ever been put this way or not, that the more power a person has, the more order they will impose. That a Stalin, anybody in possession of being the source, that everybody has to come to the king, anytime, 20th century, 5th century BC, the more power the one person has, the more regimented, that is, the more order is going to be going on. Like the old stories that they were using earlier part of this century. Such things as, well, I wouldn't want to live in Russia because you got no freedom. And somebody say, yeah, but at least you don't get mugged at night. And somebody, none of the people go, yeah, that's true. Well, it is dangerous walking out here in downtown, over here on the lower such and such side of Manhattan at such and such time in the morning. And 20 years ago, there's no chance of getting mugged in Czechoslovakia and Prague because nobody's on the street to begin with. If anybody's on the street, the police was on the street, and if they saw just an ordinary person, the order was, if you see someone on the street, shoot them. So you didn't have to worry about the rights of the criminal or what are you doing here, your Miranda rights. You just simply shot them. So you follow it. You could say, yeah, the more order there is, the more you're in a totalitarian regime. But why? Why is life like that? Why could not, if one person's got the power, why could they not go in what would appear to be, three-dimensionally speaking, the opposite direction? Well, I'm not going to answer the question for you exactly, or if I do, I won't let on. So, how about let's consider and ponder a slight twist to it. Let's look at it from the view of this authoritarian figure, the guy with all the power. This never happens. The sentence will make sense. My description will make sense, but it never happens. I'm just making this up. Back to the question of why would a person in such a position never, ever say, I got all the power? Instead of telling people, straighten up and don't get on the street and don't spit, don't throw anything, don't you ever look at me out of the corner of your eye. Don't ever put my picture in your pocket, in your back pocket, and sit on it. Instead of all that, I got all the power. Tell everybody, ease up. Have a decent time. Have some fun. Why? All right, now we're going to jump into this fictional brain of this fictional tyrant. which would not happen in the three-dimensional world. Back to the question, why would they never see any alternative, never consider any alternative other than to impose more and more order the more power they seem to have? How about consider it this way then? Although it's not the way it happens in the brain of this little tyrant. That the ruler, the dominant figure here in the dance between him and the people, let's call it the people, the rest of your neural structure. I'm sorry, forget that. The rest of the people out there in this poor little island. There is tied into life, before I go into his brain, there's tied to life, maybe this will help some of you, this fact that when order is too orderly, it begins to choke off growth. That is, as always, things can apparently go in a certain way, but once they go so far, you can only stand here and hold a quarter and look at heads and begin to turn it. I don't have a coin, but you get it up to the point that you're almost on edge. And let's say you're trying to turn it as slowly as possible, and yet in some way using speeded up or slowed down photography so that somebody could prove that you're actually still moving a little bit. You do understand the time's going to come. The trick is that you're trying to pull is you start off looking or showing the head of the quarter, and you're going to take as long as you can before the tail begins to show, while continuing to move, considering continuing to move a form of growth. No matter how slow you move, in the three-dimensional world, I hope this doesn't come as a shock, the day will finally come that the tail is going to become visible to everybody. No matter how slow. Now sure, for all I know, somebody might be able to go study with some yogurt somewhere in the mountains of India and get to where he could even drag it out. But he's still got to be moving. It's got to be proved that he's moving. You do understand. It might take days or weeks, but the day's going to come that's going to go past the edge and you're going to get a glimpse of tails. No matter what he does, as long as he moves. Do you follow that? Poor fellow over here couldn't take it. Get the nurse over here on this. Anything will finally become what it's not. There's no way out. The heads, no matter how slow, if it's alive, it will finally become what it's not. If this guy's in charge of showing heads on the quarter, and yet he's got to be alive, and being alive is going to be proven by he is as slowly as possible going to tilt the coin. No matter what he does, the day will come, if you live long enough, that tails will show. That it will become what it was not. Growth and power demands order. But when order becomes too stringent, when order becomes too orderly, it begins to choke growth. Now let us jump into the little cesspool, the brain pool of our fictitious tyrant. Why is it that it never strikes people with power to exercise the power not in increasing amounts and directions of order, but even some kind of disorder? Civilized, reasonable. Why could not we have Mardi Gras every day? If his brain worked this way, I was going to suggest that this is what the tyrant, consider that a point and source of energy transfer, this is what would be going on in his brain, if it could. That he understands, or he would know, to fear growth, which is what, in a certain way, is what the order he's imposing is to not stifle, because he can't. You can't kill life. But without him knowing it, he is attempting to stifle growth, is what the order of authoritarian regimes are on this basis, if he could think this way. That if he lets growth just go ahead, the people, any people, the people will outgrow him. In the external world, this is manifested in the times when you happen to be living, just coincidentally, that wasn't the point I brought it up, but the so-called fall of communism in Eastern Europe over the last 6 months, they just seemed like it just suddenly all happened. Where, a year ago, people would not even predicted it. It is that everything, growth finally outgrows everything. And if this dictator, if this authoritarian figure, if we were actually talking about of any significance of stuff out here in history, and if he could think in that way, if humans could ordinarily, his thought would be that I have got to impose order. I've got the power, I've got the control now, but I have got to impose order, because if I did not impose order as it apparently functions, as it apparently begins to operate in the external world, that is through a directed, disciplined regime of how a people live, if I did not do that, the people, that is, everybody's not me, everybody that apparently is now dancing backwards to my heave-ho forward, they will eventually outgrow me, which is, I was suggesting, you could see as the kind of energy dynamics behind the very things that are happening now that just suddenly, it seemed like overnight, suddenly, the people of Hungary went, fuck all this. Sorry, screw all this. And it was like no big deal. It just like a snake kind of shed its skin, and like the next day, as Hungary looked around and went, hey, wait a minute. It's like they turned to there's more than one, but that's what it amounted to, these authoritarian regimes, and just kind of looked at them. They didn't have to go out and fight. They just kind of looked at them, and the people knew, that is, the authoritarian figures just realized, uh-oh, the jig's up, the game's over. They turned in their power ties and keys and walked out. Of course, we're not talking about history, that's not the point, much less current events, or much more current events. Everything that's growing, growth itself, will eventually outgrow everything. That's why there's no end to the sentence. That's why life is episodic. That's why no matter how good things become, no matter what sort of temple is built, no matter what kind of new Reichstag building, no matter what kind of new monument to power, control, and orderness you build, not because of some kind of curse of the gods or the ephemeral nature of carnal life that, well, everything will finally crumble. Let people in the city say that, because the people in the city, it's going to crumble on anyway. Just don't be there when the buildings fall. The buildings are not the point. It's that anything life does, even in your lifetime, in case you think you missed that last 30 seconds, even when things seem to have reached an exhilarating climax, what we have done, what our great leader has done, what we as a people have done, right here on this little island, what we have built, what we have done, we have finally gotten, they might be pleased to say collectively, our act together. All you got to do is live long enough. You can hang around longer than the average dunderhead, which I'll admit is hard to do in life. But if you can hang around, if you can stick around here longer than everybody else, you'll see that even that which by everybody's agreement, if they all say yes, and you can feel like, I want to agree, yes, that this is it. We have finally not hit our stride, we have hit our zenith. This is it. When that happens, most people die. That is, before they see otherwise. All you got to do is stick around, and that's not it. If that is the pinnacle of growth, then remember I told you, growth eventually outgrows everything. And if this dictator, if this authoritarian figure could think in that way, I was suggesting that you might consider along those lines. That's why someone who ends up with total power never has any inclination, never even thinks about, instead of me imposing more and more order because I've got all this power, I could do just the opposite. I got so much power, I could appoint and anoint disorderly conduct. And if I get tired of it, I'll just go. But they never even consider that. It would be a form of uncontrolled growth. To them, if they could think in that way, it would be a portent, It would be an unspecified promise that they're going to outgrow me even faster than they're going to anyway. I'll be lucky to outlive the bastards. I'll be lucky if somebody don't cut my throat the same way I cut my predecessor's throat. Of course, they don't think that way, and that's not what life is up to in the minds of ordinary men. I'm suggesting to you that that is closer to a five-dimensional law of physics, or the five-dimensional physics, the kinds of energy operations that are happening behind history and psychology and the thought processes of man. There's a way, if you get any glimpse of that, well, you should be able to see that growth itself, which is synonymous with life in the way that we were mentioning last time, that is not synonymous three-dimensional. Life and growth is two different things. Yeah, I know that. But operationally, they're synonymous because you cannot have one without the other. It's just three-dimensional. There's no word. Synonymous doesn't cover it in the three-dimensional world because things are either synonymous or they're not. Yeah, I know. But there's something else. Anyway, life and growth are synonymous operationally. And if you see that there cannot be growth without order, and if you can see that eventually life will outgrow whatever the growth is, whatever the order is, whatever the establishment is that seems to have brought about a boon in growth. Life will eventually outgrow that. It's just the way that life inhales and exhales, is it seems as though in any given locale, it's like a whole generation seems to die, and the next one comes up, and they do not have the same perception that, wait a minute, here we are back trying to slay the dead. Here we are back trying to build things that were already built. That is, we're trying to reinvent the wheel again. Our forefathers, the generation in front of us, they said that they had finally reached the pinnacle, the final step in development, in intelligence. And we agreed with them. Why are we back trying to do the same thing over? It's as though life operates in such a way as one generation, they couldn't read the history that, well, our forefathers, or my father and your mother, they said that they'd done so and so, but of course we see now that they had not. Nobody even finds that interesting. Life will outgrow everything. Growth will outgrow everything. You haven't lost your place, have you? What I was going to say, even after you understand that, if you get some glimpse of that, then you would have to be faced with this, that a would-be real revolutionist would have to stay in some kind of frothy state of always trying to outgrow himself. And of course that is really outgrow what he knows, because you still cannot deal in one lifetime, which is not even the point, but you're not dealing with you about to grow another foot or you grow wings, or for you to have developed talent that you do not genetically have. It's this. If you're not attempting to outgrow yourself, then you're going to live in the same generation in which you now live. That is, you will live and die within the perceptions of the inhalation and expiration of your generation. You'll live and die as you. You'll live and die with what you see now. It doesn't matter, let us say, for instance, that you may understand something now more than you did before you got involved with this kind of stuff. So, what? Yeah, but it did me a lot of good. When? Well, when I saw it. When was that? Well, what year is this? But you haven't noticed that, wait a minute, you're not going to say that I hadn't gotten much out of it since then. I mean, it was astounding what I saw. Look how comforting, if we've got to go back to this, real order is. Look how comforting some sort of, we'll assume that all of you are too sophisticated, understand too much to fall into the clammy clutches of organized religion. But what if it was some kind of offshoot, some kind of little secret group, that the church had some real secret group of guys somewhere, this time not in Italy, but somewhere else. Right there is a band of Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, anybody, that their little group somewhere actually know what's going on. Isn't that comforting? That if you could find them to go join it. Now, we're not talking about some kind of Johnny-come-lately little group somewhere that figured out how life operates, because they couldn't do it. The only way they would know, there's got to be the big L. Lloyd Price? No. He would simply ask, where were you on? You don't hear it. Lineage. If this group knew, how would they know? Because their teachers knew. The generation in front of them knew. And they can trace. They've got these little booklets there in the caves that they've been keeping. And they can trace this lineage back thousands and thousands of years. It's not a joke. It's not sarcasm. That is built in. That is almost synonymous with the ordinary nervous system. Is to want to grab somebody around the damn ankles, if not their big old fatty thighs, which is up here, and hold on, and them to say, there. And you don't even have to ask, do you actually know what's going on? In fact, God knows you don't want to ask that. It's just simply the comfort of finding somebody bigger than you are, apparently, especially an institution that's got more than one person. I mean, it's good to have one guy in front, but behind him, it's not just him standing there. Behind him is probably an uncountable number of serene-looking monks, cardinals, sparrows, people with funny hats and long braids, but they're all behind the big guy and all nodding. And your thing is, I can suddenly be held by a nice woman with the smell of flour, pound cake, and she will hold me. This group, this institution will hold me, and I don't even have to ask, do you know what's going on? The question just flies from your mind. You're held, and they dance forward, and you dance backwards. All right. Who in God's name, figure of speech, how many is that in one taping? Johnny come lately, in God's name. Where were you on our wedding day? Which I'll admit, I'm not sure that quote is actually in Bartlett's yet, but Lloyd Price has staying power. Consider the disorder that I guess somebody might consider this, at least the kind that shows on the tape here that these meetings, but the kind of disorder that I'm suggesting that a person has got to do, that they have got to be continually striving. I'll even repeat myself again. In a frothy state, at least internally, to outgrow themselves. And to outgrow yourself, there is no institution. There is a form of internal disorder, disarray, and there is no lineage. Now, in life, there is lineage. But if you consider that there's some sort of important information, that you just want to know what in the world is going on with man, the first thing that hits anybody, it's almost impossible to get away from it, because, if for no other reason, you should be able to see this, the absolute lineage, the absolute unbreakable nexus and chain genetically of humans. You didn't suddenly just pop up here. I don't care how ashamed you might be of your mother and father. Of course, it's good they're not here to comment on you, but you did not simply spring up, nor did Jesus or Boog Powell or Soupy Sales, all those great guys. The truth is, they all had a mother and a father. There is an absolute unbroken lineage that brought us all here. Figuratively speaking, we won't go into people that came in on a bus. A UFB, an unidentified flying bus. But for the rest of you, the rest of us. And so there is almost no way to ordinarily escape the feeling that, all right, if there is secret knowledge, if I really follow the hobby, if I really try to scratch where I itch, that I won't find what's going on, there's no question except to look where. Now, you might think you're hip, sophisticated, and think, well, it's not going to be as obvious as I might think, so I'm going to have to scratch around and find it. But it's obviously going to be, once you do find it, that some conspiracy somewhere, some cult, whatever it is, it's going to have a lineage. How else would they know what's going on? Nobody contemporaneously knows what's going on. They never have. That's why it's orderly. That's why it has a lineage. If anybody knows what's going on, don't you understand? It's outdated. That is, I'm not playing with words again, and this is not some sort of 1950 San Francisco Zen revisited. It is a fact. It's just three-dimensionally incomprehensible. But if something is now an orderly piece of information, in other words, it's established that you find somebody somewhere, not just one guy, not just some idiot standing around running his mouth, but a guy standing around perhaps running his mouth with a whole lot of people behind him. And everybody going, yeah. And not only that, but he was taught by a guy that ran his mouth with a whole lot of people behind him, and on and on and on and on and on, that this is established secret information, to what I found now. It's outgrown. Hence the old, I started to say jokes, but some people don't find them funny, or the kind of jokes somebody does track down a secret hidden guru somewhere and asks for the secret, and the guy tells him, and the person goes, what? There are variations of it. You didn't seem to like that one, but I told you not many people do. Well, you got your choice. The joke is this. That is the short wire in reality, if you can hear it. You sell everything. You swim. You climb up mountains. You roll through burning deserts. You kill yourself. And you finally, years and years, you find the guy sitting there up on the ledge. Not off 47th Street. I mean, up in the Himalayas. He's on the ledge. And you ask him, what's the secret? And you go, why should I tell you? And you tell him. It takes you 2 months to tell him all the crap you've been through to get there. And he goes, well, all right. And so he tells you the secret. He just comes out and he just says, all right. He makes you know, and he goes, all right, you got your choice. There are two punchlines. Neither one of them are funny. But one of them is, after all this, maybe you say, would you repeat that? Just so you make sure you got, and so he goes, one of them is, you go, what? That is, that you can't believe it, or it doesn't make any sense. The other punchline, or just leave it, because you're able to figure it out. The other punchline is, he goes, and even before he's through, you're going, yeah, I knew it. It's one or the other. But do you not understand that both of them are orderly? But do you also understand that if indeed you had a nervous system so inflamed and frothy, it won't hurt you to say frothy 3 times in one day, will it? If you're so inflamed, neither one of the explanations, the secrets, neither one of the two are satisfying. But now do you see, you cannot blame it on the info, not if you've got any sort of ability to see past bifocal thought, binocular thought. It's not the info, it's the nature of how energy passes in the three-dimensional world. And there are only certain channels that can be perceived of information passing, of energy passing. So if there's somebody, apparently an authoritarian figure, and you find him, and everybody around, they're pointing, not to necessarily this time to a dictator up in the palace with a coup that's now a fait accompli, but now the wise man. And so you find him, and you go there, and everybody says, yep, him. And you say, do you know the secret? And he goes, You say, will you tell me? All right. And so he tells you. There's only 2 possible things he can say. In the same way the dictator, there are only 2 possible things he can say. To your inquiry about, could I have more freedom, or can I do this or that? He only has 2 possible responses. This is apparently having to do with matters political. But now, speaking about matters intellectually, although I know your forefathers would have called it spiritual, but at least non-somatic, non-material, non-physical, you ask the wise man, Tell me the secret. There's only two possible things he can say, no matter who he is, no matter when it was. And if you had a nervous system that's not going to be satisfied with an episodic explanation, that is, just because they say, tonight will be the final episode of Dynasty, Dysentery, what the name of it? Dallas. We've lost our sponsors. The writers are tired of the show. We just figured, what the hell. But this is the last one. And so tonight we're going to tie up all the loose ends. We hope you enjoyed it. We appreciate your participation and your viewership. And you... bye-bye. It's only ordinary people that's going to be satisfied. It's only ordinary people that can be satisfied. That is, ordinary nervous system can be satisfied by saying, what's the nature of life? Whatever answer is available in the city, it's only ordinary people be satisfied, but it's always got to be on the basis of an episodic satisfaction. Not that the series, not that all of TV is now explained. It's this one series. Seems to have come to some kind of conclusion. They said it had, so what's my choice? Or you ask a question, what happens after you die? And in the city they say, oh, you live again. Oh, good. Well, what else can they say? I don't mean they. What else can the nervous system process? There's only two choices. Let us say that was what you swam through the oceans, climbed the mountains, went through the desert, lost your credit rating, and found this wise man. And let us say that the question was not just what's the meaning of life. Maybe you said, I got to know, I'm scared to death. What happens after you die? Now you can blame it on the source, but remember it takes two to tango. You could only process two possible answers. There's only two things he can say. You say, I got to know, it's just one thing. What happens after you die? There's only two things he can say. There's only two pieces of information that will flow through the wires of the three-dimensional intelligence. He's going to say, him or anybody. Or you say to yourself, oh, after you die, nothing. That is, you're dead. The other possibility is, oh, you don't die. What a relief. What a relief on what basis? What's the choice? All right, I was trying to make it very specific. Now take what I was saying in a less specified way. The information that's available, even if it appears to be very specific and it appears to be even exotic, God forbid esoteric, they still say that. The information is always going to be orderly, it's always established, but life has outgrown it. That is why, if you've got the potential to be a real subversive, then none of the answers in life are satisfying. And it's nobody's fault. It's not the church's fault. It's not your mother's fault. It's not your father's fault. It's not even your fault. But any answer that's available from an orderly source is already outgrown, or it would not be part of the established order. I don't care if it seems to be on the fringes. If some ordinary person can tell you, if they can mark off the territory in your brain, if they can find the place and they can tell you, you're back to my same kind of example of God showing up in Cleveland. If you want to get past dictators and gurus sitting up on ledges, the big cheese himself. And he says, all right, you guys have done pretty good, or else he says, you guys are driving me nuts. You notice that you only got two choices. In other words, to pay you off or to pay you back, I'm going to be in Cleveland next Thursday and I'm going to tell you everything you've been wanting to know. And everybody shows up. Like, is this something? I mean, this is, I thought it was something when I was they were going to have Barry Manilow sit in with Dave Brubeck Quartet. But hey, nah, that's hard to believe. But the old man showing up himself to tell us, this will be something that will never be repeated. This will be unbelievable. No, it won't. What can he say? If there was this kind of personification of a human somewhere in another dimension, he could come here. If he comes here, shows up in Cleveland, shows up here, shows up in your backyard, shows up in your underwear, talking to you, and you're expecting to hear something great, what are you going to hear? If it was something, as you might call it, chipmunk talk, great, that is unbelievable, it would be what? Unbelievable. Which is really beyond that, it would be inaudible. Your transmitter could not translate what he was saying. And so to think, well, hey, boy, I can't wait to die and meet the old man and be able to sit down and chew the fat and ask him, what was life all about? And like he'll finally tell me. What's he going to tell you if there was such an occurrence going to happen? What can anybody tell you now? What have you ever told you? A real revolutionist has got to be striving, fighting continually to outgrow what he already knows. Because if it is not growth unless it is outstripping, unless it is outgrowing itself, which is now back to what I was suggesting that some of you might consider as to why, if things operate this way. Remember, this is all, even beyond metaphor, this is into symbolism. That authoritarian figures, dictators out there, which now you should be able to see, I hate to do it, is the focal point of your own thinking, what seems to be the center part of your own consciousness, your own sense of I. That's your authoritarian figure. The reason it cannot turn everybody loose, even the more power it has, the more power it has, the more order it imposes. And it never says, wait a minute, I got so much power, what I have to fear? Loosen up, folks. Get out there and wander around. Come up with some new ideas. Let's loosen up the arts. You know, paint, do anything you want to. Make all kinds of music. I mean, do music that I might personally dislike. I don't care. Does your brain ever do that? Does it ever happen in life? Why do you expect more out of dictators than you do your own brain, or vice versa? Why do you expect more out of a pope than your own brain? Out of a rabbi, out of your mother than your own brain? There's nothing going on out there that is not going on at the subatomic level in you, in the superatomic level, cosmically. Nothing. The dictator. Yeah, that tyrant out there. Forget me saying it could happen in your brain. Forget that. I didn't want to confuse anybody. It cannot tolerate the idea. I'm making all this up. It cannot tolerate the idea of letting order loosen up, no matter how much power it's got, because if he understood that much, he would understand this. If I loosen things up, things will grow faster. They just will. And if things grow faster, the day's sooner going to come that I'm out walking in the unemployment line. The people will outgrow me. Forget about some kind of armed counter coup of them trying to take over. It'll happen like I was suggesting to you that even has happened externally in the last 6 months. It's like one situation, one structure just crumbles. Not a shot fired. It's just like everybody there involved, all the dancers, is like, ugh, you know, I'm sick of this dance. And in that particular area of life, it outgrew what was going on. No matter what it is, life eventually outgrows it. Growth outgrows anything. If it doesn't, it's dead. That's simple enough. It's no longer growth. A revolutionist, someone striving to do this, has got to continually be striving to outgrow what they know. It's not theoretical. It's not something you can sit down and plan. If you're sitting down and plan it, you're back in the Garden of Eden. That's just outside of Eden. Since everybody believes they can't get back to Eden, you're back in the Garden of Eden, though, which is a real silly. I'm not even going into it. But just imagine anything called Whedon. You know, go from there. And the angel garden in this particular place was named Elmer. So, need I say more? I guess you can figure it out. I guess everyone can see quite plainly that life has an immediate and a widespread, to say the least, vested interest in order. Particularly in the order specifically that should concern you, since we don't have any bears here tonight. It has a vested, immediate, always immediate interest in the stability of the planning field of man's intellect. That is, of order. That the balance is always toward order. Forget the theories of entropy, which is another. It's not that those are wrong, because we've used them here ourselves as examples. But it's simply the backside propping up what I'm talking about tonight of order. Life has not only a vested interest in that on the ordinary level, but I was going to point out that it also, I guess you would have to, saying this rhetorically, that you would have to admit that life must have some interest in a type of disorder, or else how do you account for this kind of stuff? But it's immediate, it's widespread, it's truly vested interest is in the orderness of the planning field of everybody else's intelligence, of people being able to depend on established knowledge, people being able to depend on, quite simply, what they know. In the city, it appears to vary from person to person. People are more educated than other people, and some people, blah. But it's on the basis that, generally speaking, for the average middle of the bell curve person in life's body, they've got to be able to depend on what they know. And so ideas of me saying that to be a revolutionist, you have got to be almost drooling at the mouth. 4 cliches in one night. Straining at the bit. All right, don't stop me now. Tippecanoe and Tyler too. There's the only one I can think of. Striving to outgrow what they know. If in some way this could be imposed on an ordinary intellect, you're talking about serious, what do they call it? Mental disorders. That is not the nature of an ordinary man's intellect. Contrary, it has got to be able to depend on what it knows. And to, of course, to varying degrees, to the same extent that everyone must live in the city, you've got to be able to depend on what you know. You've got to be able to depend on how you drive home, what bus you catch, where you live, which key fits the lock in the door so that you don't have to keep reading. There are things that you know that you depend on. The knowledge that would seem to be the playing field, the building side of one's own, what is it people like to call it? Personality, themselves. What they know, besides these little mundane things about, well, I know where I live, and I know my apartment number, my phone number. The rest of it, an ordinary man has got to be able to depend on it. He cannot outgrow what he knows in his lifetime. He would be, all right, I got 6, a basket case. It's not a proverb, but it's a cliche. Typical. Ordinary intelligence has got to be able to not outgrow what it knows, which I might also suggest is the real operational basis behind other such proverbs as you can't teach an old dog new tricks, which sounds like some kind of attack upon the growing, if not senility, the lackadaisical attitude of people trying to continue their education, or the laziness of the intellect. It's an observation of the health of life, because a lot of people's got to die for a lot of other people to get here. You finally got to get out of the way. Well, you've got all this property set aside off the tax rolls in many cases of cemeteries. Somebody got to fill them up. The idea that you can't teach an old dog new tricks is simply, if you can see it in a more manifold view, an observation on the health of life. You're not supposed to be able to teach old dogs new tricks. Because to teach an old dog a new trick, now you got to jump from canines now, talking about human intellect. You would have to jump into somebody, anybody. And of course, it seems to be really exemplary or exemplified if you're talking about chronological age in life. But you have to grab, let's say, an old person. I'm talking about somebody really old, hell, 45, 50. You got to go into their brain. You got to take what they know that they can depend on, and you got to snatch it away from them. You got to retrain them. Forget somebody real old, 45 or 50. You don't find people nowadays 21, 20, that wants their brain snatched away. That is, what they know snatched away and start all over. Give me a break. I'm trying to make some money. I was planning to be a millionaire before I was 23. Don't take away what I know. There's no desire inside the healthy intellect of any ordinary person to outgrow what they know. Although they wouldn't use these terms. They would, if they tried to hear what I was saying, if I was silly enough to talk to them, they would either take what I'm saying as being some sort of directive to drive yourself crazy, or else something that would be so unprofitable that would almost sound like, well, you're saying that every few years you're supposed to be kind of trying to find your brain and then find some kind of eraser and start all over. Which they'd be right to laugh at or to go, hell, if I could do it, fat chance.